had its first official tournament last weekend. I wanted to talk a little bit about both the results of that tournament and some of the thoughts on the coverage and other stuff from it in a constructive feedback style perspective. To start with, an old favorite of mine, Bounce featuring Bast with Mysterio, was the ultimate winner of the tournament with these 12 cards. Mysterio is really slick with Bash for people that aren't familiar with that interaction because it hasn't been meta for a little while. If you bash your Mysterio, you get 3 power things that like all trigger a bishop, and they give you 3 extra things for Hit Monkey as well. I think the Mysterio inclusion here, as opposed to other things that we've seen in the past, like Black Swan, means that your deck has a lot more resilience to the lots of copies of Mobius that are running around in the metagame. Past Bounce winning the tournament, as expected, Thanos had a very good weekend. 4 out of the top 8 competitors for the tournament, it was a top 8 cut, were Thanos decks. But if you look past just the top 8 cut, or more, I guess shorter than the top 8 cut is the point I want to make, is 7 of our top 8 deck lists went 8-1 or better, with 1 person sneaking into top 8 with a 7-2 record after 9 rounds of Swiss, and 4 of the 7 8-1 and better deck lists were Thanos. And the starting field that we had was about 30% Thanos. So essentially, Thanos was 30% of the starting field, but it was nearly 60% of the deck list that went 8-1 or better after the 9 rounds of Swiss that we had. So as expected, Thanos as a deck overperformed significantly inside of this tournament because it is the best deck by a pretty wide margin, I would wager right now. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. I think people know that that's the case. And we're probably going to see balance changes coming up on Thursday with the OTA to things related to or directly to Thanos. In addition to the Bounce deck taking first, we also had a very unique take on Pixie, featuring a copy of Hulkling as a card that made the top 8 cut as well. And I've got this one pulled up on here for the top 10% slice on Untapped for our latest patch, which kind of brings me to the next discussion point I want to make about deck lists, because Marvel Snap isn't a game that's really had tournaments, so people don't really understand how to parse this information, is that the 2 most interesting deck lists that made deep runs in this tournament, the Bounce deck that ultimately won it, and this other one, this Pixie deck that made top 8, they're not particularly strong decks in general. So in a 700 game sample here, it's got a 48% win rate with slightly cube positive. And if we expand this to top 50% infinite, the sample size goes up and the average cube rate goes down on this one. And similarly for Bounce, we've got a sub 50% win rate, and this one's actually negative average cubes with 230 games in the top slice. When we look at top 50%, this is an interesting one. The win rate goes down, but the cube rate actually goes up. But in either case, like, the deck isn't particularly good generically. And whenever you point that out, people always be like, well, Jeff, the deck's hard to play, or there's bad people playing it. And that's true, but that's true of all decks on public trackers. So you can reasonably assume that every deck on a public tracker like Untapped has similar amounts of good and bad players playing it, and despite that, decks that are good and have strong performances will regularly have good stats on Untapped if they're powerful decks that can carry the player. And it's important to understand that variance in games like Marvel Snap cuts both ways, so just like good decks in the hands of good players can have a bad run, bad decks or weak decks in the hands of really strong players can have good runs. And I think Marvel Snap, one of the things to its credit from a game design perspective, is I feel like Marvel Snap's game balance philosophy rewards deck experts, which is to say they do a good job of when they nerf things of not making them completely unplayable, and allowing you to be someone who just hammers a deck constantly. And something that I would wager was incredibly true in this tournament is that both Derek playing this bounce deck and BU++, or Butt for short, the player that was playing this this Pixie deck, even if these decks are a little bit on the weaker side compared to Thanos, the Pixie player and the Bounce player assuredly had more reps playing into Thanos than the Thanos players had playing into them. And I think if those players were on even ground and there was equal amounts of experience in the matchup on both sides, the Thanos player probably gets favored because their deck is more powerful. However, that's not how tournaments work, right? Like, what are the upsides of bringing, as someone who's brought constantly rogue decks to tournaments over the decades I've been playing card games, what are the big upsides of your rogue deck is not just a surprise factor, because this tournament was open deckless. People knew which cards they have, but there's value in knowing the play patterns of the matchups that you're playing in. So being the bounce player and knowing how bounce lines up into Thanos and how bounce lines up into these other decks, but the people that are playing those other decks, even if their decks are ultimately more powerful, not being familiar with the matchup gives value to the person who's playing the lower power deck with having that experience and the repetitions in the game that they're playing. So I think it was sweet. I think pretty much exactly what I expected as far as tournament results go. I don't know that I would have told you exactly Bounce was going to win, but I think half or more of the top 8 being Thanos, the deck that's very clearly the best deck, is pretty expected. And I think Marvel Snap does a good job of allowing there to be rogue decks, and in any game that has variance by design means that any deck can win at any point. And in fact, I want to make it very clear, this next statement is not intended to belittle the skill of the Derek. They played very well and made a lot of great decisions, but ultimately, if you go back and watch the finals, they were 1 cube to 1 cube, and the deciding game was literally decided by a New York location slide on turn 6 in tandem with tech cards not lining up with the New York slide for the Thanos player. So like that last turn had very slightly different permutations of going different ways, because New York, there's just always 1,000 lines that effectively makes it a flip. It's one of the least interesting locations in Marvel Snap, in my opinion, for that reason. And it's, it could have cut very different with any of the other number of permutations. It's funny, I commented, there was really nothing more peak Marvel Snap than the last cube of the finals of the tournament coming down to a combination tech card New York style coin flip, essentially. Like, just peak whatever. Thoughts on the actual tournament itself? I hope that if Second Dinner is going to continue doing tournaments like this, it seemed like it was a success. I was not able to watch the coverage because I was hanging out with friends over the weekend out at my camper and with the family, but I poked in and out a little bit here and there, and I ultimately watched the end, and it seemed like the coverage was really well put together, and they have pretty good viewer counts. They had 2,000 plus concurrent viewers on the main broadcast the entire day every time I was poking in and out of it. I will say, as someone who's run a lot of, I'm just going to call them janky tournament coverage things via Discord screen shares, I hope that if Second Dinner is going to invest in official style tournaments like this again in the future, they will consider putting dev effort and energy into giving us a spectator mode, so that way we don't have to have janky screen shares. Like, the finals of the tournament actually had both players playing from mobile, of all things, which was both funny and sweet, I think, but it also meant that those players were screen sharing from their mobile devices, so the finals coverage is just like this narrow strip down the center of the broadcast, which there was nothing the broadcast team could do about that. Like, Discord screen share options were the only thing, but it would be ideal under ideal circumstances if that wasn't the case. I think I was pretty impressed. I think Guest Gaming was the one that looked like he was managing the production in addition to doing commentary. As someone who's done that, there's a lot of moving parts going on. I think my only big comment or shout out / suggestion to Guest Gaming is They should figure out the logistics of doing time-shifted feature matches so you can watch multiple games per round that have a little bit less downtime. I think it's a little bit jarring as a viewer to hop into like you finish your first game and then you like come in the middle of a game in the same round as opposed to starting another game from the beginning again. And with proper technology, they can do the logistics on that. That would have been funny with the two mobile players. They could have both perspective on the screen. They could have done that, but I think that might have been hard to follow from a viewer perspective too. Yeah, they were only ever showing one perspective, which I think is ideal. But overall, I think this tournament thing seems sweet. I hope in the future, as far as timing considerations go, I will say I think the timing of this tournament was the least ideal they could have possibly had. I think one of Snap's best features is its generally regular live balance. And I hope if they decide to hold another one of these tournaments in the future, they consider doing it quickly following the heels of an over-the-air update to encourage players to be seeking out new, innovative things as opposed to just like, we've been playing with Thanos for 3 weeks. So I think that's something Second Dinner could do better on their part, is lining up any event like this in the future with their better balance cadence to showcase that part of Snap that's good a little bit better. People that have been here for the last 10 minutes while I've been rambling about this, any thoughts or things that I should comment on about the tournament that I missed? I feel like I hit most of the points I wanted to talk about here. And people that are just joining us, you might be watching this on YouTube right now. It's going to be on the Hooglandia Snap YouTube channel, so smash that like button and all that jazz. I think I covered everything. Appreciate people that watched it all the way through to the end. On the YouTube side, leave a comment down below if you want to see more Marvel Snap tournaments and what you think they should do for that. And I'm live on Twitch Monday through Friday most of the time, so be sure to come up by and check that out.